Shalom. Let's see here. This is Shira Sherbow coming to you from Sfat, Israel. Welcome to our weekly meeting, Torah for the Nations. You know, when my daughter was in middle school, the teacher had all of the kids come up and tell the story of how they got their name. And she has the funniest story, and so maybe all of us have a story of how we got our name. But her story goes that I named her Michaela, and at first I liked the name Micah, and I said, well, if it's a boy, it's going to be Micah. If it's a girl, it's going to be Micah. And then a friend of mine who was a midwife, of blessed memory, she said, what about the name Michaela for a girl? And I said, oh yeah, I love that. I love Michaela. So I changed it. I said, if it's a girl, it's Michaela, and if it's a boy, it's Micah. So my daughter was up in front of her class, and she's telling the story of how she got her name. And she said, I'm so glad that my mother named me Michaela and not Micah. And the teacher says, well, I think Micah is a very nice name. I named my daughter Micah. And I'll never forget, my daughter Michaela came home from school and she was like, Mom, it was so embarrassing, like foot in mouth moment. Of all the names that her teacher could have named her daughter was Micah. Okay, so anyway, I have a funny story that goes with my name. My name right now is Shira, and that is the Jewish name that I took on. But the name on my birth certificate is Cheryl Lynn. And so my funny story goes that my mother had been babysitting for a woman who had a little girl named Sherry Lynn. And my mother loved the name Sherry Lynn, and she loved, this lady was from the South, and she had a Southern accent. And when she said Sherry Lynn, my mother just was like, oh, I love that name. And if I have a girl, I'm going to name her Sherry Lynn. So my mother, when she had met my dad, he was Catholic and she wasn't. And so to get married in the Catholic Church, my mother had to take Catholic lessons. And so they got married in the Catholic Church. And then they had me, and they brought me to the church. And the priest said, to be baptized. And the priest said, well, what name do you have picked out? And she said, Sherry Lynn. And the priest said, well, no, that's unacceptable. Sherry Lynn is a pagan name. And my mother was so upset. So anyway, to reconcile that, my name, they put Cheryl Lynn on the birth certificate because Cheryl was not a pagan name. But anyway, I was always called Sherry, except when I went to Catholic school, I was Cheryl. But then a couple years ago, when I became Jewish, I decided to take the Jewish name Shira. And in Hebrew, Shira means song or poem. And the thing that I love about Shira is that the Torah is supposed to be sung. And the Torah is supposed to be a song that never grows old. So it's supposed to be not just passed down from generation to generation as like a history book or a lot of laws, but we're supposed to make it new in every generation and relevant for every generation. So it's a song that never gets old. And I'll read you some of the things that Jonathan Sachs has said about it. He said it's a covenant, this covenant that was not to grow old. It has to be periodically renewed. And another thing about the Torah is that it's more like a person than an object. I was sitting in our class one day, our ladies' class, and someone walked in carrying the Torah, and everyone stood up. So the Torah, it's like a king, like you would stand up for a king. I remember being in Catholic school, and when the priest came to our classroom, we all stood. Well, here, when someone walks in with the Torah, everybody stands like the Torah is the king. And God forbid, like something happens to the Torah, it has to be buried like a human, and it's actually mourned. And we have a holiday in the fall called Simchat Torah, where we actually dance with the Torah. And it weighs like about 30 pounds, so it's like carrying around a little toddler. And you dance with the Torah like the Torah is the bride. So if people only knew, how revered the Torah is. And like when we read the Torah, it's not really like reading it. It's like chanting it. So the Torah is like a song. He says, because music is the language of the soul. And at the level of the soul, we enter the unity of the divine, which transcends the oppositions of lower worlds. The Torah is God's song, and we collectively are singers. And we can argue when we speak to each other, but there's something about a song that there's a harmony, and it creates unity, and there's an emotion involved. And this is how we're supposed to pass down our Torah to the next generation. We pass it down as a song. Like we pass down the newness of it becomes new in every generation. It's not anything new, but we make it new. We make it relevant. We make it work for every generation. That's how the Torah is not ever supposed to get old. So this thing, right now we're in the festival of Passover. And it's the festival of the matzah. This is the matzah. And the matzah, we call it the festival of the matzah, because the matzah is a symbol of getting rid of arrogance. The bread is like puffy and filled with yeast. And so this is a time to get rid of arrogance. And I don't think that people realize the arrogance involved in just calling the Torah the Old Testament. Or there are several times that people have contacted me recently that they send me things from my past and things from the New Testament. And they want to know basically if I'm still doing things in the new, quote, New Testament. And it's really hard to explain how, the Torah came down on Mount Sinai. The Torah came first. And so there are things in the New Testament that the New Testament has taken things from the Torah. So the things that the New Testament has taken from the Torah, well then of course, yes, because I keep the Torah. But the arrogance comes from trying to say that the Torah is old, or the Torah has been replaced, or adding things that are not part of the story. Like for instance, our story of Passover. Our story is about taking the blood of the lamb and putting it on our doorpost. And so in the Torah, the lamb or the goat is the idol of the Egyptians. And so we take the blood of the Egyptian idol and we say, here's what we think of your idol. We take the blood and in broad daylight we say, here's what we think of the Egyptian idol. We take the blood and we put it on our door. And God tells us, you do your part and I'll do my part. And it's like it was a very brave thing to do, to say, I'm leaving behind, God is going to save us from the Egyptians, from all of this idol worship. And so it's just a whole different meaning when you get to the New Testament. It's like people don't realize the arrogance of taking the Torah and taking the meaning of our stories and changing them into something else, and changing the meanings of salvation and changing the meaning of the blood of the lamb. And so I think that we're finally coming to a place where people are starting to be more and more ready to go back and to say, what does the Torah say? And I know in my life and in many of y'all's lives, you got to that point. Like you just wanted to go back to the place of what does what is being taught, what was being taught at Mount Sinai. And I was looking at next week's Torah portion, and in our Torah portion next week, there, we always say that whatever's going on in our Torah is also going on in the news. And so I looked, and of course it's about death and contamination. And the week after that, there's actually the word quarantine. So here's the Torah. It's the song that never gets old. It's a song that's relevant for every generation. And here we are, next week in our Torah portion, we're going to read about the death of Aaron's sons and about the contaminating clean and unclean foods. And I wanted to just read some things that Heinrich Smith said, because he's talking about our Torah is not, you could pick it up, and if you don't learn from the Jewish perspective, if you don't learn from the Jewish worldview, then you could be thinking that it's just a bunch of rules, just a bunch of do's and don'ts. And he says it's about being able to hear the music, about the song of the universe, and it represents a different worldview. So it's a worldview that says that every single thing has meaning. The food that we eat has meaning. There's cause and effect on ourselves and on the whole cosmos. And he says that eating is a very spiritual endeavor. And that there's a potential there for holiness, and there's also the potential for dehumanization. So he says that we have the ability to elevate divine sparks by eating with gratitude and intention and mindfulness, or we can actually be brought down. He says creepy crawlers have negative energy, so it can even bring us very far from the honor of Hashem. So we have a choice. So many of us, when we weren't even Jewish, we looked at all of these eating laws and we thought, maybe, I know he's only talking to the Jews, and this is something that he's telling the Jews, I want you to eat these foods and I want you to stay away from these foods. And many of us started to just say, well, maybe that's something I want to take on. Maybe I want to start eating clean. And what we realized when we started eating clean, just trying to draw close to God and just trying to please Him and leave paganism behind, it was like it was a turning point. And the more that we leave behind the falsehoods, and the more that we start eating clean, it's like the scales are removed from our eyes, and we start to hear that melody. We start to hear that song. And so it's like we start to get tuned in, and we can hear the music of the whole universe. And so I started to look at the Torah. Here we are with this virus and all of the just what's in our Torah portion, the arrogance, the death, the contamination. And I was looking and I saw that there's 3 Torah portions coming up in the end of June and the beginning of July. There's the Torah portions of Hukat, Balak, and Pinchas. And in those 3 Torah portions, there's a lot of talk about a plague ending and about purifying things that are not pure. And so I thought, okay, well, if I just had to make a guess, and I guess wrong a lot of times, but if I had to make a guess just according to what's in the Torah, I'm thinking that would be maybe the time that everything will end. I don't know. But I was listening to some rabbis talk about our Messianic age that we are in, and it's not so much about who the Messiah is, as it's about, is the world changing? And so it's like you can look and you can see on a worldwide scale, like the world is changing. This is affecting the whole world. They say our world is never going to be the same, and we're definitely in the Messianic age. And so it's exciting. It's exciting times that we live in, because just like in the days of the Passover, when they were leaving Egypt, there was that generation that they were the last generation in exile, and they were the first generation to go into, to go out of Egypt. And so it's kind of like this could be us right now. I mean, we've got one foot as being, still in exile, and one foot like, wow, what if we're about to, go into the Messianic age? And so it's going to be like it can't happen too fast, they say, because we'll freak out. So things kind of have to happen like slowly, so we can kind of adjust going from one world to another world. But it's exciting, and it's here we are in 2020. They say hindsight is 2020, so it'll be a lot easier when we look back at all of this than to try to predict right now the way it's going to go. Who knows? I don't know. But I just know that it's very exciting, and I wanted to read you one thing here, one last thing. I have this book called The Orchards of Delights by Rabbi Avraham Trugman. And so here we are, we have this coronavirus, and of course it's a negative, but they say that a lot of very positive things can come from it. And so in this passage, he was talking about the Messiah and his lineage. And when you look back at the stories of Lot and his daughters, and you look, and that from that union, very strange union, Ruth came from, and Ruth is in the line of the Messiah. And then you have this story about Tamar and Yehuda, and so I'll just read what he says. But you take all of these like not so great, pure stories, but from that we get something very good. We get the Messiah. So here's what he says. He says, just as the Messiah's sparks and lineages is revealed in this world as the result of a number of strange and mystifying sexual liaisons, a drunken Lot sleeping with his daughters, Tamar seducing and sleeping with her father-in-law Judah, the circumstances leading to Boaz's marriage to Ruth, the Moabite convert, and the state of affairs surrounding King David's conception. So too, God uses the impure Balaam to reveal the most exalted of prophecies. There is a lesson to be learned from his doing so. God can use even the lowest of the low to serve his purposes. So I think that's, here's this virus, but God can use something like this to serve his purposes. It says that the Midrash teaches that God has a passion to have for himself a dwelling place in the lower worlds. From the beginning of time, from the beginning of creation, when we're reading in our Torah, all the Torah stories, next week we're going to get to like the climax, what everything was leading to is coming up. Like the tabernacle is there, and they're going to put out the sacrifices, and they're all going to witness this amazing fire come from heaven. And I mean, if you can even imagine what that would be like, to see God accept your sacrifice, and to see like heaven and earth joined, and to just see God's desire has come true. He wants to have a people that want him in this world and that want to obey him. And so finally it's coming, and we're going to be reading about it in next week's Torah portion. It says, God had a passion to have for himself a dwelling place in the lower worlds. We interpreted this concept as meaning that God wanted divinity and spirituality to infuse all aspects of life in the physical world. The tabernacle in the desert and the temple in Jerusalem are the quintessential representations of this ideal. Here, though, a different aspect of God desiring a dwelling place in the lower worlds is revealed. God desires to utilize even the lowest of the low to fulfill his will, to serve him as an instrument in carrying out divine providence. Okay, so God, this is from the Torah portion of Balak, which is coming up like in July. But he says, God subverts Balaam's evil intentions by converting them into an opportunity to bless Israel. So you can take these evil things, whether it's Balaam's evil prophecy, or whether it's the coronavirus, or whether it's this weird story of Lot and his daughters and Tamar and the whole thing. However it's cloaked, this impurity that is cloaked in, God uses those lowest of the low things to bring his purposes about. So we can't be fooled, by the way things look on the outside, because God uses all kinds of things to bring about his purposes. All right, so our Torah is a song that never gets old. It's not the Old Testament. We can see that it's very relevant. What's going on in the Torah is going on in the news. And we're just looking forward to redemption and enjoying this holiday of the matzah. And it's funny because in some religions, like in the Catholic religion, it's considered a virtue for the priest and the nuns not to get married. But Orthodox Jews get married and they have lots and lots and lots of kids. And so it's considered a virtue to have humility. And one of the best ways to learn humility is to get married and have kids. And so here we are in this week of Passover, and everybody's stuck in the house, and we are learning humility. So we're just right on target here. All right, that's all for now. We are going to have a meeting in the Zoom room starting at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So I hope to see you there. All right, that's all for now.